All right, folks, led by Liz Gross, who's the director of mStoner, our next hour-long session will cover how to find and analyze online conversations to identify strategic influencers for your institution. And Liz will share best practices for campus influencer collaboration. Liz is the founding director of mStoner. Her professional superpowers include designing and analyzing market research, applying social media strategy to multiple areas of a business, and using social listening to develop consumer insights and assist with brand reputation management. Liz, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mallory. I'm excited to be here with everybody today. Mallory gave me a great introduction. So just to follow up, a few months ago, I launched mStoner, which I'd love to tell you about some other time. I've also been a market insights manager, a social media strategist, and a campus marketing and communications director. Looking forward to bringing all that together in what I'm going to share with you today. If you would like to taunt me while I'm presenting, feel free to do so on Twitter. I'm at LizGross144. That is a math problem for those of you who may not be aware. 144 is a dozen, which is a gross. And this is where if we were in person, you'd all go, oh. So feel free to tweet or now, later, but I won't respond until after the session because I am focused on you all. So to set expectations, here is what we're going to cover today. We'll set the stage with some data about the importance of peer influence. And then we're going to dig into some basics of influencer marketing so that you can understand why you may want to find strategic influencers in the first place. Next, we'll really talk about social listening and how it's a powerful tool to find influencers. Then we'll talk about how you can determine how influential some of the people that you find using social listening really are. And then finally, we'll briefly review some best practices for you to keep in mind when you start to work with influencers. We should have about 5 to 10 minutes for Q&A at the end of the session. So feel free to type your questions into the chat as you think of them. And I'm sure the magical Mallory and Bianca will gather them for all of us. So first, we are going to dig into the data about why peer influence matters. I believe peer influence matters for two important reasons. And the first of those is trust. We have a trust problem in our country, around the world, and especially in higher education. According to the Edelman Trust Barometer, which has been collecting data about trust around the world for over a decade, the most trustworthy person in this country is a person like me. 60% of people say that a person like me is a credible spokesperson. That is just about the same percent of people that trust an academic expert from your campuses. We're doing pretty well in comparison to the rest of the world. However, only 37% of people think a CEO is a credible spokesperson. Government officials are down at 29%. But as a whole, if you look at trust across not just our country, but across the world, people without higher education and with lower incomes, who are the people that higher education should be most interested in reaching, in my opinion, are about 15% less trusting overall. So if we as higher education marketers are not confronting the reality that Joan Q. Public is just as credible as too much of your audience than a distinguished faculty member, then we are actually ignoring reality, as sad as that may be. It has never been more important for our students, alumni, and their family members, as well as our community, to be able to adequately tell our story and help higher education regain the public trust. Let's look at another data point that is probably not also going to be the happiest, but is reality. The majority of Republican or Republican-leaning voters think that higher education has a negative effect on our country. And this is not meant to be a partisan presentation. This is just data coming straight from the Pew Research Center. So again, if we're not confronting the reality that Joan Q. Public is just as credible to your audience than your distinguished faculty member, which is what the Edelman data tells us, and B, that at least half of the people you're trying to reach may actually think higher education does more harm than good, which is what the Pew data tells us, we are ignoring reality. If we boil this all down, trust is the reason that peer influence matters. And it has never been more important for us to empower our students, alumni, their family members, and our community to adequately tell our story and help higher education regain that public trust. I am excited to be a part of the movement that is committed to making sure the public regains higher education, because we know how important it is to our economy, to personal growth, and it's why we all do what we do. But there's a second reason that peer influence matters, and that is the proliferation of social media in our society and among our target audiences. The vast majority of adults use social media, which I hope is not a surprise to anybody here. But what is just becoming known, though, is the role that social media and peer influence plays in processes that are particularly important to higher education marketers, like college choice. So, I would like to spend a little bit of time talking about ideas that come from a new concept paper from Joanna Kretzel. She's a doctoral student at Victoria University, and this was just published a few months ago, this fall, in the Journal of Education, Culture, and Society. The article was called Social Influence and Student Choice of Higher Education Institution. The paper notes the vast body of work on social consumer influence in other industries outside of higher education. It is widely accepted that our social networks influence our purchases of many things, from the movies we choose to go see to the car we go choose to buy, or perhaps the neighborhood we choose to live in. So, the author of this paper asks, what does the research on influence in college enrollment and choice look like? So, to answer the question, she conducted a review of the literature about factors influencing college choice and described the three factors that the research community has generally accepted as influencing college choice after 4 decades of research on the topic. So the first is institutional communication. So, yes, what you are doing every single day absolutely matters. Specifically, the research on this subject refers to web content, advertising, and printed communications as having an important influence on college choice for students. The second is student related factors. These are things like demographics, socioeconomic status, academic abilities, cost, and other practical determinants of college admission and choice. Again, the research is really solid here. We know that these things have an influence on college choice. The third in the paper is the greater social environment, which does include family and peers. This factor is different from the other two, and that the findings are actually less clear on the impact in this area. So, while family influence is best understood and there's not a lot of debate among researchers in that area, peer influence is much less understood by researchers, particularly when you add social media into the mix. So, signs are that college choice is influenced by peers in a way similar to general consumer choice. But this research really hasn't had the time to catch up and come to consensus on this. This is all actually very exciting to me because you all and I am a practitioner, not an empirical researcher. So we can be much more nimble as we test and learn from different approaches to marketing. In my mind, the hunch that some people have regarding the convergence of peer influence and social media should not be ignored. But what's important to take away from this session is that social media is not a silver bullet of influence. The mere existence of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat doesn't magically mean that it's influential. Social media on its own is not influential. The people, personalities, and stories represented through social media are what influence students, alumni, and their community, whether that's on where to go to school, where to potentially transfer, or where to give their dollars after they've graduated. This is why influence matters to higher education marketers and why we should be working to identify and leverage influencers. So next, we are going to do a crash course on influencer marketing. So hold on to your hats. And again, if you have questions, keep throwing them in the chat because Mallory will be saving them for me to get to later. Before I get started in this section, I want to hear from you. How do you define an influencer?
All right, Liz, it looks like 75% believe it is someone my target audience trusts about a specific topic, and 12.5% someone with a lot of followers, 12.5% someone paid to talk about my brand.
All right, we have a pretty astute audience here. There's technically no wrong answer to this question. It's all about if you want to add strategic into the mix. So let's talk a bit about this idea of followers versus influence. And I like to talk about that in regards to influence versus celebrity. So the quote I'm sharing on the screen is from the head of influencer marketing and advocacy strategy at an agency. And he stated this really well. So I'm just copying and stealing it. You don't need a particularly large audience to have influence. You need conviction and trust. So we've already covered that influence is important because of trust. So if you think about celebrity influencers, step back and think, do you really trust celebrities? Especially after the last couple of months. Do you think your prospective students and alumni trust celebrities? I would argue no, that they're trusting people that they know either in real life or have come to know online through their stories and status updates. So they might be thought leaders that have established trust through authority, or they might be peers that have established trust just through being relatable. There is no one size fits all definition for influencers, but we can get close to defining what they are. So I hope it's clear that celebrity doesn't necessarily equal influence, and influence doesn't necessarily equal celebrity. But what I do want to spend a little bit more time talking about is the difference between influencers and advocates. So both an influencer and an advocate has influence, but they each require distinct marketing strategies. So advocates, which you likely are already in contact with, are your biggest fans. And they are your biggest fans and they talk about you without prompting. You probably have a few of these super overengaged students on campus that are always talking about all the great things that are going on. You may have some incredibly engaged alumni. They are advocates. You should absolutely nurture them, but that's not who we're focusing on today. Today, we want to look at influencers, the strategically chosen people who partner with you to help you achieve specific marketing goals. And there's four traits you want to look for in a great strategic influencer. So, first, like we've been hammering home already for the last 15 minutes, they have the trust of their community or audience. Second, what makes them strategic is that they drive discussion around key topics. Whether this is online, off, or both, they are regularly engaged in the conversation that you are seeking to influence. Three, they tend to answer the questions that everyone is asking. That may not necessarily be of their own authority, although it certainly could be. It might also be that they're a phenomenal curator and they're providing resources to a community that answers all the questions they have about a specific topic. And fourth, they are highly engaged with their community. So they're not just broadcasting messages or acting like a billboard, they are having real conversations with people every single day. So your advocates are fans, influencers are leveraged to be a bit more strategic, and they have these four key attributes. So you can expect to receive about 7 benefits from influencer marketing, and I'm going to summarize them for you here. So, first, we'll talk about reach and awareness. So, whether we're talking online or off, influencers have already built an audience. If you're trying to reach a new target audience or build an audience from scratch in a certain area, this can be very valuable. And the great thing about working with influencers is you can be pretty sure that the audience is real, living, breathing humans if you have chosen them strategically rather than a network of computer driven spam bots that are just attempting to look like people and inflate a follower number. Another benefit is research and feedback. Your influencers will act like a very engaged focus group. They will quickly tell you what is working and what's not. And they're a fantastic feedback loop that can be counted on to give you quick responses to your ideas for campaigns and messaging because they're both familiar with your target audience and your brand story. So they can help you see that disconnect from a different point of view if there is one. The third benefit is content ignition. I am willing to put money down on the fact that somewhere on your website, social media accounts, or printed campus magazine, you have a lot of really fantastic content. But there is a lot of content out there, and it can take a connection with someone we trust to bring that content to the top of the digital pile. Influencers serve as that connection between your content and their audience and can get more eyeballs on that content that you have created for that specific audience, even evergreen content that maybe just needs some new life because of a new recommendation from someone with trust or authority. The fourth benefit is site authority and SEO. So in higher ed, you're probably not overly concerned with your site authority. You're ranking pretty darn well on Google already. But if you're trying to rank for certain terms, influencers can help you by creating content that mentions your brand alongside those terms on their own websites and social posts. And if you happen to be building any web properties from scratch, this can help you rank early for the right things by tapping into that influencer's authority that they've already built up online. The fifth benefit is strategic leverage. So, if you are in a highly competitive field, say business schools or some real niche academic programs, getting the right influencer on your team can be a strategic move for you. Particularly for highly specialized programs, there are only so many influencers to go around. So if you have them on your team, it's likely that your competitors don't. And particularly in higher education, this is an area where folks are generally not tapping into that pool yet. So it can be a strategic advantage to be early. Sixth benefit is cost savings. So, in an era of always restricted budgets, it's important to think about the fact that influencers are individuals, not corporations. So, a couple hundred or $1,000 means a lot more to them than it does for your media buyers when you're talking about reach and actually getting eyeballs on things. So, as you track your influencer marketing programs, you will likely see that the ROI is higher and the cost per lead or impression could be a lot lower if you're using influencer marketing to reach certain segments where it makes sense. So, while you will likely spend more of your staff time working with an influencer than you would just buying media, if it results in conversions, for me, that seems to be worth it. And then the last benefit I want to talk about today is authentic advocacy. So, the absolutely best influencer marketing program pairs a brand with an influencer that is legitimately happy to talk about the brand because they feel that it provides value to their audience. You really can't put a price on that in a world where trust lies in the hands of someone like me for a lot of the population. So we talked about the benefits of influencer marketing, but what will it actually accomplish for your organization that aligns with your institutional goals? Well, that is next. So, there's a lot of data behind this slide. About a year ago, Top Rank surveyed 102 brand strategists from multiple industries. So, this data is not specific to higher education, but it's some of the first good in depth data out there about influencer marketing. And they asked what goals these organizations were using influencer marketing to achieve. And the top four, which were mentioned by over 3/4 of all the respondents, were improving brand advocacy, expanding brand awareness, reaching a new target audience, and increasing the share of voice, which is the amount of a peer group that is represented by conversation about your institution compared to the other peers in that group. Now, although the goals listed here are all brand outcomes, influencer marketing requires a marketer to exercise a lot of empathy and think about what their audience really wants. Influencer marketing is only successful if the influencer is delivering desired content or information on behalf of the brand. It has to be content that the influencer's audience desires, not just something you're pushing out because it matches the message you're trying to promote at the time. So consider this before handing off any content through an influencer. Just another aside. There were some other great points from this study that I wanted to share with you as well. One is that content marketing and social media marketing are the areas where most brand strategists report influencer marketing as being impactful. So I'll say that again. Brand strategists report that the area most impacted by influencer marketing right now is content marketing and social media marketing. Just under a third are reporting that it is actually impacting media relations. So that's an interesting emerging field to take a look at. Half of the strategists surveyed say that their influencer marketing budget is much smaller in comparison to the rest of the marketing mix. That can also be because they're seeing a cost benefit there, but over half of them expect to spend more next year. I pulled all of this from the Influence 2.0 report from Altimeter. So if you want to dig deeper into that report and the recommendations therein from Brian Solis, you can download a free copy at the link that is either on your screen or is magically going to pop up on your screen in just a few seconds. Yes, you will have to give them your email address, but I can vouch for the quality and low quantity of emails they send. It always has good data or case studies that come from this group. And no, I am not a paid influencer for Altimeter, but they do have some great data. I'll also have a link to this at the end of the presentation. So before we dive into social listening, I want to get a feel for where this group is at. So the next poll is just going to ask if you're currently doing any influencer marketing at your institution.
32.1%, yes, they are currently using influencer marketing. 67.9% say no.
We've got some early adopters in the audience. That is exciting. All right. So we are going to talk about how you find these people, who are, or what are the tools you can use to find influencers to help you achieve your objectives. If you're not already immersed in the area where you are seeking to influence, like it's not a community that you live and breathe every single day, social listening can help point you in the right direction by looking at online conversations. So in this section of the presentation, I'll introduce the concept of social listening for those of you that are new to it briefly. And then I'll cover 3 steps to follow to find influencers, looking at both free and paid options to do that, and then walk through 2 specific examples of how you can find and vet influencers to help achieve your objectives. So, social listening overview in probably 3 to 4 minutes or less. I always start by saying that we need to acknowledge the fact that everything that happens online is real life. There was a time where we talked about what, IRL and on the internet. The fact of the matter is, many of the good conversations we have, many of the relationships we build, and frankly, some of the jobs people do now all happen online. So, if you accept the fact that the internet is real life. When I talk about social listening, I'm thinking about all of those things that happen online as real life being transcribed, categorized, and analyzed to provide your institution with the insights that it needs to support data-driven strategies. So it's like an always accessible transcript of the internet that you can then take and massage to get the data that you want. Specifically, how it works is you look at all the conversations happening online, whether these are on Twitter or Instagram or blogs or the comment section of the news, heaven forbid, online forums, really anything that is publicly accessible. And then institutions use queries to narrow that down into what's of interest to them. In just a few slides, we'll look at some influencer queries. And then that gives you the results that you can work with. And those results are where you can answer research questions, find out what your audience is saying, and get some insights that actually impact your institution. So how do you use social listening to find online influencers? Well, first, you need to consider your goal. We talked a lot about the goals that you might be using, and we're going to dive into this deep in just a second. But looking at that goal, decide on either a topic area of conversation or a target audience that you're trying to reach. And it might be a combination of both of those. 2, then you really want to get into your mind of the audience, just what Mallory was just saying. What are the related topics to that audience or topic area that they would actually talk about? Consider thinking about questions that they might have that start with what, when, and how, because these are the types of questions that your influencers are probably already answering. And then three, you want to conduct a thorough search with all tools available to identify trustworthy individuals in these conversations, preferably those that have a meaningful connection to campus, if you can manage that as well. So let's look at each of these steps in detail. So, your goals are likely similar to those we already talked about that are identified by other industries: improving brand advocacy, brand awareness, reaching new audiences, and increasing share of voice. But they might be more specific to a topic like recruitment or fundraising. If you can specify that goal within that context, that will help you decide on a target topic and or a target audience. If you're looking at a target topic, you might want to find influencers with authority in that specific area. And in my opinion, that's where you can be the most effective, but it's also where you will have to do the most research. If you're looking at a target audience, you'll want to find individuals that have influence over a certain demographic. This is where people tend to default to celebrity. Like, oh, I want to reach teenage girls, so clearly I should get Taylor Swift. This is what I caution against. You want to think micro targeting when you think target audience in this area. So a specific city or a metro area, or a niche group like teenagers who like to play specific video games, or mid-career manufacturing professionals. Something that is a group that you're likely more able to reach with an influencer who is a human rather than someone with celebrity status. So, what might these specific goals look like, specific to recruitment or fundraising? In recruitment, you want to think, what stage of the funnel are you trying to impact? Because the goal of get more students is not going to be an easy one to match up with influencer marketing. But are you looking to increase awareness, increase your inquiries, do something with yield? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to reach a new target audience that you're not currently seeing in your inquiry pool? Or are you trying to work with a target audience you already know a lot about? And are you promoting any sort of specific program or campus feature? As you look at influencer marketing, getting as micro targeted as you can be really valuable. So rather than saying, I want to reach all of the 16 to 19-year-olds in a certain market, maybe you want to reach the ones who are interested in engineering in a highly competitive market like Boston or something like that. Flipping this over to fundraising, maybe you're looking for a new target audience and you want to think about location or age or the academic program that they graduated from. And maybe you're trying to look at a new audience and you just want to increase their engagement financially by increasing donations. These are some examples to start thinking about how you can create that very detailed goal that gets you to a target topic and or a target audience. So next, you want to get in the head of the audience. As we've said, successful influencer marketing focuses on providing value to the audience of the influencer in a way that also contributes to your institutional goals. So finding the best influencers mean finding people who can deliver what their audience wants. And if you want to find this type of person, you have to know what the audience wants. You certainly can brainstorm this in a staff meeting, but you can also use social listening to find this as well. And this is where you really start to get beyond the basic get more students or get more donations. Think about the fundraising example. Why are people donating? How does it make them feel? What benefit does it give them? Do they feel like part of a bigger group? Get into that why there. Also, what does your fundraising ultimately achieve? Can you focus on the outcome that individuals are contributing to and show in the aggregate what that actually does? Also, who is talking about these things? You can dig deep and see, are people talking about the outcomes but not the donation? And can we work to tie that together a little bit more through messaging? Looking at recruitment, you want to think, what is your target demographic interested in? And how can we tie that back to some features and benefits of campus? Who actually talks about those things? Those might be the good influencers. Or what questions are they already asking about your school or your program? And who is answering them? Who is answering them as the influencers? What questions they're asking is that topic area you want to focus in. You'll notice that these follow a pattern of a lot of what, when, why. Those are the types of questions that can help you really figure out where influencer marketing can be effective. And then the third step is start searching. Again, look at those questions that are being asked, who's asking them and who's answering them, who is new to the conversation. Maybe you can pick up on someone who has just started to develop trust and influence and work with them as they continue to develop. Or maybe you want to look at who's been influencing a conversation long term and jump in with an established influencer. There's pros and cons to both of those things, but there's something you want to consider. Don't necessarily throw someone out because they've only been influential for the last couple of months. A couple of months on the internet in today's environment can feel like a very long time. And then start looking at who has an impact. When you're trying to find an influencer, you want to find someone who is impactful. I would love to give you a list of metrics that you use to measure impact, but it is an imperfect science. So, some of the things you can look at are shares of their content, comments on their content, and give a little bit of credence to some of these influencer scores like cred and clout. They shouldn't be your only indicator, but they are an indicator of impact. You also might want to look at the followers online that your influencer has and make sure they belong to your target audience. You can use a free tool to do that, and I'm going to go through that example in just a bit. And then also, you want to find someone who is highly engaged, ideally across multiple platforms, meaning they actually have conversations with real humans. So, I'm going to talk about how you can use social listening tools to search for influencers. If you're working in a topic area or with a target audience that you're already very familiar with, you might already know of some of the influencers you could tap into. But these tools are best if you're looking to add to the list of people you already know or exploring that topic or your audience for the first time. So, the example I'm going to spend the most time on is if we are looking to find influencers to help with admission to a business school or an MBA program. So we're starting with a lot of words. I love to share queries, and I want to show you how I might search for this. And this is only an introduction. This would actually get a lot more in depth and contextual as we study this audience over time. So I've shared two searches with you that I might use to find people talking about business school and MBAs. The first is on Twitter because any of you can do that, and that is free. So this Twitter search is looking for anyone talking about an MBA or business school. And they're also looking at the why, what, or how response. And when we're looking at Twitter, we want to be looking at the people results of the search, not individual tweets. So this is how you would maybe look in for who's actually asking and answering questions about business school, business degrees, and MBAs. And then Brandwatch is one of the dozens of tools that are available out there for paid social listening that allow you to get a little bit more granular with your queries. So here I am looking for a query saying, get my MBA, apply to business school, go to business school, get a business degree within 5 words of that why, what, or how question. So I wanted to share this just so you could see what I was starting with. I kept the why, what, or how in the Twitter search rather than just looking for conversation about business schools, because if you don't include that, the answer or the results that you get are all MBA programs on Twitter, which is not helpful in this instance. You want to see the actual conversation asking questions about it. So, what do we find when we do these searches? Well, on Twitter, if you click over to the people section rather than looking at tweets, you're going to start seeing just a list of Twitter profiles that responded this search. Now, because Twitter is Twitter and they don't always tell you everything and it's free, you're getting these profiles in an unknown order. So they can be a good start for you, and this is definitely something you could dig into. And if you're looking at a really granular search, it might give you some really great information there. If you're doing this search in Brandwatch, you'll get a larger swath of the internet. So you will see Twitter users that you can then sort by how much activity they have, like tweets that actually match that query, what their audience reach is, what their algorithmic impact score is, how many followers they have. You'd also find bloggers sorted by how many posts they've written that match your query, the site rank, Moz rank of their site, and backlinks to their site. You might also you'll find some forum authors sorted by how many forum posts they have posted and their impact, and you'll also find topics of conversation. So some example of what the results of the brand watch query was this blog called Wallet Squirrel, which I had to share because they're very honest. It was voted the #1 finance blog on blogging, savings, and investing by our friends. So it's actually a new and developing blog that might be an option for somebody who wants to go with maybe a lower priced, easier to work with, easy entry influencer. Another website that came up was ClearAdmit, a site that MBA candidates are using, as well as these many individual Twitter users, but I picked these three. One with 79,000 followers, and then some others in the 23 to 25,000 follower example. So when we look at how you might vet an influencer that comes up through these searches, I'm going to use this example of Jane with 25,000 followers to see if maybe she's someone we want to use to influence this business school MBA conversation. So for this, I am going to jump into some free tools that you can use. So whether you found your potential influencer just via a free Twitter search or a paid search, you can start using Follower Wonk to go and analyze the followers of any Twitter account. So we're talking Twitter only at this point. So first, if you go into Follower Wonk and analyze this Twitter user, you will be able to see where their followers are located. So if you are trying to reach a certain demographic, a physical, geographical demographic, then this will help you see if they're a good choice for you. Clearly, Jane's followers are mostly in the United States and highly concentrated in the Northeast. So that may be good or bad, depending on the organization that is looking at Jane as a potential influencer. Next, you want to see how engaged is she. So this feature of Follower Wonk breaks down the outbound tweets of any Twitter account into 3 categories. The first is tweets that don't start with an at mention. I would call these broadcast tweets, and they are dark green on this chart. The next is tweets that do start with an at mention. Follower Wonk calls those contact tweets, and those are light green in this chart. And then finally, retweets, which are yellow. So this can show how often an individual actually responds to people or retweets other messages and what time of day they tend to do those things. So if you want your influencer to be engaged, so there should be a good mix of all 3 types of tweets. I would highly caution you to beware of the influencer that only has broadcast tweets and or retweets. That means they're probably using a scheduling software or they're just auto retweeting certain accounts and they're not actually talking with humans. There are lots of accounts from both real influencers and from bots that look like that and have large follower numbers. And if you're not spending this time to research your potential influencer with this social data that's out there, you might be missing that and end up working with an influencer who doesn't actually have a lot of human contact. So the next thing we want to do is continue to look at Jane's followers. So we're still within Follower Wonk, and they offer the ability to look at a word cloud of all of the terms that appear in the bios of the followers of Jane. So the word cloud is very small and hard for you to see on your screen. So I copied and pasted the terms here for you to see. And it's very, very clear right away that although Jane is involved in the business school conversation, it's really the healthcare business conversation that she is participating in. So again, depending on what you're seeking to influence, this may be good or bad, but if you were trying to look for an MBA that is preparing people to work in finance, this would be a good sign that this is not the influencer you want to be working with. So those were a few ways that you can use a free tool, Follower Wonk, to really get an idea of what is going on with an influencer who appears on Twitter. I want to share another example of something that you might come across. Again, this came up through the search I ran in BrandWatch for business schools or MBAs. It's a photo of a student that is very excited to graduate from the University of Texas at Arlington this last May. And it had almost 3,500 likes on Instagram. She mentions in the caption that she wants to go to business school this spring, which is why it showed up in the search. But if you're to click over to her profile, you'll see that she's also a YouTube creator and a fashion influencer. And I would certainly think this would be an interesting opportunity for whatever school she happens to be attending this spring to really get her on board right away with the marketing communications office or maybe with the admissions office and see if she's interested in chronicling her MBA experience, because this whole idea of online creators as a business is emerging. She's going to get her MBA and she's going to further her business. And that would be an amazing, relatable story that could have a lot of great influence online. The last part of this business school example is something else social listening can tell you, which is what is being discussed about your topic of interest. When we use that why, what, how in our query, we see that people have questions about running a business, taking the GMAT, student loans, getting an MBA in 3 years, what the top programs are, online programs, etc. So really digging into this topic data and seeing what those online conversations look like can let you know what specific content areas might be ripe for influencer marketing. And because I bet you're curious, just so you know, the MBA from M&M was a TechCrunch article that ran out, and someone actually thought you could use 8 Mile as a way to get all the learnings you could from a business degree and just watch the movie instead. So clickbait always is going to show up online as well. So that was the business school example. I also want to share one other example that was really close to me and is something that I was working with over the last year. So what you see here is looking at a very specific conversation. It's the conversation online about social listening in higher education. So yes, I do social listening about social listening. It's very meta. But after finding all of the conversations about this topic for a couple of years, I was able to use social listening software to sort the authors of the conversation into rules and categories that made sense to me because I was familiar with all the people in this conversation. So I have anonymized the names that were here, but basically people fell into buckets of influencer, number one, this was an individual's name, an agency or a representative from an agency, this was all agencies, it was a bucket, individual campuses talking about social listening, a specific social software company, a second individual influencer, and then everybody else was in the uncategorized conversation. It was clear from this analysis that there were 2 individual influencers in the conversation, as well as a few agencies trying to enter the conversation. And it was also clear that campuses weren't really a part of the conversation until early in 2016. So this type of influencer analysis was done not to start any sort of online influencer campaign, but rather to understand an emerging market and identify real and perceived thought leaders. So this was a key part of the research that we did to create the business plan for Campus Sonar and show how an emerging market was being discussed. I share this with you to demonstrate that finding influencers from online conversation can be valuable to you, even if you're not looking to start a true influencer marketing campaign. It could be useful for program development, for example. So, this session was about finding influencers, not conducting actual influencer marketing campaigns. But I would like to end with some best practices for influencer marketing so you have something to use to get started if you want to. The first best practice is research your influencers. What I shared with you today is how you might narrow down a giant conversation into a couple dozen folks that could be candidates for influencers. But before you reach out to someone to join an influencer marketing campaign, you need to know as much as you can about them. What are all of their online properties? What are they saying? Do they already work with other organizations? If so, how do they do that? What sort of conversations are they having with people? What sort of conversations do they have in other topics not related to the topic you're seeking to influence so that you feel really well that you know who they are before you can contact them. And you don't want to end up working with someone who is just selling themselves as an influencer, but is not really that authentic part of the conversation. Next, don't be seduced by super high follower numbers. I have spoken with one agency in higher education that actually uses influencer marketing fairly regularly, and they work with people that have follower numbers, trying to influence people like you and me. They have worked with people who have follower numbers in the high hundreds and low thousands, all the way up into over 10,000 followers, which is a lot for our industry. And it's not always the people with the highest numbers that are the most effective. It's the people who are actual participants in the conversation and develop a good relationship with the brand. So just because there's a high follower number, don't think that that means automatic success with an influencer. Like I said, spend time to get to know your influencers and establish trust. So after you've done all that research about them, don't just send a cold email, ask to join an email marketing camp or an marketing campaign, and then send out a bunch of content. You need to spend time so that they know your brand and your goals and your message, and you know how they would like to participate in that, so that you trust each other, because trust is important in that part of the relationship as well. Gather feedback regularly from your influencer, both about how their audience is reacting to the content, but also about how they're able to use whatever it is you're giving them if you're giving them content. But along that line, be ready to relinquish content control. The best influencers are not just copying, pasting, and regurgitating content to their audience given to them by a brand. They are weaving in their own words, telling their own story, and maybe writing their own content from scratch. So if you're not willing to do that, you might not be ready for influencer marketing. Next, know the Federal Trade Commission's endorsement guidelines, because you and your influencers will have to abide by them. Mallory, I sent you this link, but too late. It was earlier this morning. So if you happen to have it, it can pop up on the screen. If not, we will share it after the session. It is up because Mallory is a wizard. So these guidelines are things you should definitely bookmark and be aware of if you're going to do influencer marketing. And then finally, build in tracking capabilities to measure success against your stated goals. So if your influencer marketer is doing, or your influencer is doing this marketing online, you should be building in tracking links in the URLs or special codes to download deliverables or things, so that you know how that influencer actually contributed to driving eyeballs and driving conversions, so that you can measure that against your stated goals and look at your ROI. Finally, understand that influencer marketing is a long term commitment when it is done most successfully. While many folks try to test influencer marketing in a single campaign, it can be really hard to deliver results in a short time frame, whether that's a few days, weeks, months. Ongoing programs that allow the brand and the influencer to get to know each other better over time and develop a consistent message for that influencer's audience are the most likely to be successful. So just before we jump into Q&A, there's a few links to the large studies I referenced in today's presentation that you can have right here for your reference. I've also included a link to subscribe to Campus Sonar's monthly email newsletter, Brainwaves, which is packed full of information about the quickly evolving landscape of social listening in higher education. That next issue is coming out on Monday, so be sure to sign up soon if you want to make sure you get all 2,000 words of goodness in that newsletter. But I want to thank you for being here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that have come in.
Liz, we've got about 7 or 8 minutes for questions, and I do have a few for you. The first being, can you tell us the difference between an advocate and an influencer? Would you mind covering that one more time?
Absolutely. So, an advocate, when we're talking in influencer marketing terms, an advocate is somebody that is a big fan. You don't have to tell them to be a big fan. You don't have to send them content to be a big fan. They are just out there talking about you. They love you, and they're just happy and they share it. If you look at the general customer continuum, maybe 1% or less of a customer of any organization is going to become an advocate. But that's what brands love, because you don't pay them, they extend your brand for you, and they're great. So someone who leaves a movie, loved that movie, and tells all their friends how much they love that movie is an advocate. An influencer is somebody who is strategically chosen by that brand or organization to influence the conversation because of that trust and authority that they have already built up in the space. So they have the potential to become an advocate, and some influencers do become rabid fans, but they are chosen because they're already that trusted voice in the community that the brand wants to reach, and then the brand and the influencer works together to get that message out to the audience.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification. So we've had a few people in the chat room, specifically Amber and Melissa, kind of wondering, if pure influence is so important to trust, are current students and recent alumni really considered peers if you're thinking about reaching prospective students? And then kind of as a follow-up, speaking about alumni specifically, how impactful can they be as influencers? And are there any pitfalls you need to be aware of?
That was like 17 questions. So, first of all, I absolutely think that current students and recent alumni can be key influencers for prospective students. We have seen research, I don't have it at hand, so I can't cite it well, that when students go online, particularly on social, they want to see a real day in the life and what it's really like on campus. And current students can really be great influencers in that regard. Alumni, I think, particularly once they're past a year or two, are most likely to influence other alumni. So if you think about it, you likely have some sort of a peer group of people that you graduated from the same institution with. You may not be really close with them, you may not be in regular contact with them, but there might be an opportunity there to provide some influence and a little bit of social pressure, if you will, for those of us that start to feel that as we're moving on in our careers, it's time to give back. So I think recent alumni are great for potentially influencing prospective students because they show you very concretely what could be done with a degree quickly. So if they are looking at an outcomes based choice and they want a job and they see someone who had a great experience and has a job they love, that's an excellent point of influence. I think it'd be very hard for a lot of prospective students, particularly if we're talking about traditional age students, to identify with an alum who's 20, 30 years into their career. I think they're more likely to influence either the adult student or other alums that are like them. I might have missed some of the parts of that question.
No, I think you hit all the high points. Thank you. We are, of course, there's a few folks who are wondering, how do you actually approach these people and how much do you really have to pay them?
That's an excellent question. So I'm going to speak from personal experience because I've been approached in really great ways and really bad ways before, and I have friends that have shared those stories as well. It's best to just be very authentic. So if you know someone who actually knows the influencer in real life, that's a great place to start. But a really well crafted email can go a long way. And basically, it can be along the lines of, we have noticed you for X, Y, and Z. So definitely throw some compliments in there. Do they have a great blog? Do they have a really good Twitter presence? Like, don't focus on their followers, focus on their content. Um, and then share what you're trying to accomplish briefly and say that you'd be interested in talking about a partnership. So opening it there and keeping it sort of vague is a really great place to start a conversation where you will also get to learn a lot about the influencer and how they might work with people. And be ready at this point in the game to be approaching people who've never been approached like this before. And the vast majority of those people are just excited to be noticed and they want to learn more. And then as far as what to pay them, that is going to vary based on what you ask them to do. So, what I have seen in practice, and I don't believe there's any data on this. If someone knows about it, please tweet me and tell me. But what I've seen in practice is that um, it really is two different ways of compensating influencers. One is results based compensation. So if you're doing a lot of tracking, you might be able to pay based on inquiries that were received or signups for an event or donations made or things like that. In that regard, that is a value that you can put on it. So how much are you willing to pay for that inquiry or that sign up, and then offer that results based? For something like an organization trying to bring in general leads and wanting to download an ebook, say, that's probably going to be somewhere somewhere, depending on the content and the ultimate sale value, in the $15 to $50 range per lead. So it's a big range, but that depends on the organization. The other way to compensate is to just pay for output. So say we'd love for you to write a blog post and send 3 tweets, and we'll give you a couple $100 for that. Most people in this like micro influencer area would be willing to do that. Some of the higher following folks who like are sort of pseudo professional influencers right now are going to look for something more than a few $100s. But if you look at that spread out, it is a low dollar per influencer investment. And then hopefully over time you work with multiple influencers. So still being determined. I look forward to finding data on it so I can share that later.